Let's start with this idea of financial inclusion. What is it and what is the state of it?
So we define financial inclusion as people, from whatever background, from whatever walk of life, that they're able to have access to fair and affordable financial products and services, so that they can actually weather life's ups and downs, but also build their long-term resilience, and ultimately so that they've actually got that sort of headspace to be able to really participate fully in society and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to them. And you might say, well, where are we in terms of the UK? So as of today, our latest research, there are 17.5 million adults in the UK in financially vulnerable circumstances. Yes, 17.5 million. 14 million people have less than £100 in savings. So a washing machine breaks down, or you want to get a washing machine. That's a life event. It's not something that's within your realm of possibility. And the real challenge is that actually for people then being able to access the things that, for you, if you didn't have your savings, what would you do if your washing machine broke down? You might borrow a small amount of money, you could probably get it at a reasonable interest rate, and you'd pay it down and life would be fine. Whereas if you're someone who hasn't, has got a poor credit record, a thin credit file, has had a history of maybe not making some payments, you cannot access that. And so when we talk about small amounts of unsecured credit, we're talking about amounts typically about under £500. But the difference that can make to somebody's life is phenomenal.
Right. And Matt, if you could just add to this in terms of where we are now, how dire do you see as the problem with the folks that you interact with, that Barclays UK interacts with? And additionally, push this forward. What do you foresee the problems to look like in November, in December, when the weather turns cold and the cost of living crisis continues?
Yeah, well, I think the situation is going to make everybody make very difficult decisions about how they're going to weather through the inflationary environment, whatever their financial circumstances prior to this were. But as Sacha said, there is a particular part of the economy which is going to suffer very significantly and acutely. And they're going to have not lifestyle choices, but life choices to make in terms of how they weather through the winter and potentially some of the resilience challenges that she's just referred to. So there's very definite things that I think all of us need to do to make sure that people have the financial resilience and safety net around them. I don't think we can all just wait for the government to make those decisions.
Okay, well, armed with the knowledge of the unfortunate truth, Sacha, what is, or is there a game changer? Step one, this is the thing that needs to happen.
It would be lovely if there was a silver bullet, wouldn't it? I don't think that there is just one thing that this is the thing that would make the difference. However, I think that what we know is that if you're looking at somebody building a safety net, that you want to enable people to start to build savings. You want to enable people to weather life shocks. You want to, and weathering life shocks, if you think about it, if you haven't got friends and family, and if you've not got your savings, then actually you want to access small amounts of affordable credit, you want to have affordable insurance. At the moment, there's quite a poverty premium that exists. So if you are poor, if you have a poor credit record, where you actually go to for credit is actually high-cost providers, or a really burgeoning, organised crime moves in where there's a market gap. There's a growing amount of organised crime getting into illegal money lending in the UK, and that is tying into other crime in terms of people then how you actually repay if you can't pay financially. And we're at a lovely dinner, so I won't go into it, but you will watch the telly. You can do the maths.
Is this something that governments need to step in terms of regulation, or is this just about having access to credit and that solves the problem?
I think it's going to be. At the moment, there are too many market disincentives, and Matt will be able to talk to that in terms of the market alone fixing this issue, right? So I think it's one that's going to need a collaboration between government, between regulators, between financial services. There are economies around the world that do this, right? So, where they align what they want the market to do in terms of, how much capital of banks needs to be allocated to certain areas, serving low-income people, looking at how regulation, is tailored not only to protect people from harm, but also to enable a market to function.
Right.
There are lots of things at the moment that actually would make it really hard for you to step into providing unsecured credit to low-income people. We need to make sure that the environment changes so it makes a logical, rational business decision for you to do that, because community finance providers, credit unions, they are part of the solution, but they on their own are not going to fill the 3 billion gap in provision for people in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, what would it look like? Sacha makes a great point. The economic incentives aren't there to provide credit for the financially vulnerable. What would need to change to make it so that that is feasible?
So I think there's two things. I think one, as Sacha alluded to, I think you've got a triangulation between confidence tools and ultimately support. So I don't think any one of those is on its own going to solve it. So on the confidence side, we do a lot through a program we call Life Skills. We've done it for 9 years now, impacted nearly 13 million people across the UK on really basic financial education skills. We don't do that for any other reason than we see all those customers every day in our different interactions with them, and we know that they don't have the confidence to manage that. Even if they have a bank account, they don't have the confidence to use it in the right way to build the financial resilience as Sacha rightly described. To the tools is everything from very simple budgeting and other tools. And as much as we think that is self-evident to most people, they don't necessarily understand how an APR on a credit card or a loan works. They don't understand how to manage their own budget necessarily as disciplined as other people might in other walks of life. And then finally, the products, I think, are a part of the tool and the support to be able to slot into that. But if people don't have the self-confidence, the awareness, and the tools to be able to use them in the right way, even having the product isn't necessarily going to help them. I think the model problem that Sacha describes is more a bridge, because we do have those community development finance organizations in the UK. It's if they can help, if you will create the confidence, give them the early stage interventions, how do you then build a bridge between that and the more mainstream financial community so that they can then become back a part of it?
What is the bridge then?
So the bridge, I think, is a combination of interventions on products. So as Sacha described, we have all the products available to us, but how do you construct them in a way my shareholders don't necessarily want to spend time, or want me spending a lot of time subsidizing, if you will, borrowers in a way that necessarily contravenes my obligation to them. But how do you do that in a safe way? So we have a credit card that we call Barclays Card Forward, that has a low and grow strategy on a credit limit. That's an example. But how do we create referral models between those community development financial institutions so that we're not necessarily waiting to find those people? We can get them prepared so that when they interact with us, they're ready and can use the product as confidently as they can.
Yeah. And what do you find in terms of once folks understand the tools, once they're educated, are they able to help? Are they able to access these tools? Is that sort of enough to get the education?
It's interesting. I mean, I can give you a case study in terms of the difference, the interaction between products and tools and support, right? So we're piloting at the moment something called a no interest loan scheme. So it's this idea that some of you may be familiar with the Good Shepherd scheme in Australia, which was this idea that some people might be able to afford to repay the capital on a loan but not the interest. What difference could that make? And I'll use the case study of a lady called Lisa. Her brother had committed suicide and her parents had passed away, and she was faced with not being able to provide a funeral for him, which meant the family wouldn't be able to go to his funeral. He'd have a pauper's funeral. And she had a poor credit record, she's on low income, and she qualified for one of our first no interest loans, and she was able to give her brother his funeral. She was actually really good at managing her money. A lot of people who are poor are really good at managing their money. They know the cost of everything. But what she actually got was, in doing this no interest loan, what the credit union did was said, right, when you pay us back £1 a week more. That went into a savings account. So by the time she'd paid back the loan, she also had built up some savings. She was then at the stage where, because she'd proved she could pay back, she could then borrow some money to get some equipment that she needed in terms of the house, which was labour-saving stuff, which means that she has now been able to actually start looking for a job when previously it was inconceivable. So this idea of these things as stepping stones, and I think the education works best and Matt, with all due respect, I think understanding an APR isn't, what people need to know is like, what is the cost of this to me? I don't know how many people in the room could actually calculate an APR. I did chemistry at Oxford, I can't. But I think actually being able to explain things in simple terms that people understand and to actually help them build healthy habits at the right time, which is what AIDA were doing, right? They were helping people build healthy habits, but giving them some stepping stones that made that possible, conceivable for them in their lives. And that's the really important thing.
And Matt, how hard is that to get a team to build a program like this? I mean, it's one thing to say that this is a good thing. How difficult is that to put into practice and execute?
Well, I think it ultimately just takes focus, like anything in life, and a commitment to behind it. Part of the challenge, I think, though, is then understanding the characteristics of the people that you're working with. So we spend a lot of time with what we describe as vulnerable customers. So Sacha rightly describes that significant number of people with low financial resilience. There are also 24 million people in the UK described as having a vulnerable characteristic at any given point in time. And those characteristics could be anything from a mental health issue, a bereavement, things that make them, even if you will, normal circumstances, they feel competent to manage the finances, there's something that's causing them to not be able to do that as well as they can. And I think a big part of what an organization like us can do is, again, we see so many millions of customers every day, is how do we spot those vulnerabilities and how do we tailor what we do and the support that we provide to people to recognize them so that, again, as they build those healthy habits, you're bearing them in mind in terms of how to shape those habits and what shape they would take. So we've trained 12,000 people in the past year how to spot 34 different vulnerability characteristics. That's not a simple thing to do because my team, they're not counselors, but they're getting to a point where they have to have a little bit of that mentality so that when they're spending time with an individual, they've got to look for the subtle cues that suggest this individual needs different treatment and different support than the average customer that we see.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting thing. I was bringing this brilliant challenge in terms of what can everyone in the room do. One of the things that I say is 50% of people in financially vulnerable circumstances are in employment. Yeah. And it may be due to their family circumstances. It may be people who are cleaners in the building, different people who will actually have challenges that you may not be aware of, may not see. One of the things that actually lets people like illegal moneylenders thrive is shame. The biggest word associated in terms of when people get into financial difficulties is deep shame. And we've managed to start the destigmatization journey on mental health, but talking about financial health and worries is really challenging. I've even seen that with my son who's at university, right? He's actually doing okay, but he's with some friends who are substantially much better off. And he spent much more than he should have done in September because he was trying to keep up with his mates. And so some of those things of actually everyone in the room just normalizing, checking in with people, whether actually can you afford this, is this okay? Because, when I talk about people in financially vulnerable circumstances, you may have formed a picture in your mind of someone who's in crisis, a situation. But, 3 million people are people who've got into problem debt who are earning 30,000 or more a year, right? And so I think being able to normalize talking about our financial matters, talking about can you afford this, is okay, not making the assumptions, because that's how people can find they get into situations where they spiral. There are 8 million people in problem debt in the UK. During COVID, 11 million people built up £25 billion worth of personal debt as they were trying to deal with some of the consequences, because while some people could save, there were an awful lot of people who eroded the buffers they had and had to go into borrowings. So I think that's my first thing, is everyone can normalise that, but also make people aware that, as Matt said, there are community finance organisations whose awareness levels, for anyone in the room a marketeer? No? Excellent. Right, Jane, awareness levels of credit unions and community finance organisations is 2%. It's like through the floor. And so getting people aware that there are places they can go to then helps us start to build these bridges in terms of referral mechanisms. Because actually, those community finance organisations, they are currently delivering 300 million of that 3 billion gap. That's a hell of a gap to fill. But if we can scale them, then they might become investable for you to be able to look at your shareholders and say, yeah, actually, this is a sensible investment for me to make. And that's the journey we've got to go through.
I kind of want to get your take on Sacha's first point, because you're at this obvious, very fascinating intersection of offering these services to folks who are financially vulnerable, but also an employer, someone who manages employees. How do you look at that? Do you have programs for your employees? What does that sort of balance look like?
Yeah, of course. So we have all the support that we provide externally. We first make sure that we practice at home first and make sure that all of our colleagues first are paid well. So there's the living wage that we provide. And then two, that the tools and capabilities available to them are as strong as they are to any of the external communities in which we provide them. The big thing, I think, for us, though, is where those problems show up. And I think Sacha just alluded to this, but, we find a lot of the challenges that she just described in terms of that shame, people aren't going to tell their employer about this issue.
Right.
So it isn't as though we can hold forums with colleagues around the room to say who's got a financial challenge. They're not going to declare it in that way. So part of it is educating line leaders as to how they, again, spot signs of vulnerabilities in their own team. So that the thing that manifests itself as a performance weakness in the job might actually have an underlying economic or family issue around it. And again, that's a huge management challenge in terms of building the skill and capability to do that I think every organization can learn. And then two, again, where does the problem show up? We're spending a lot of time, for instance, with the NHS, because a lot of financial health issues end up as physical health issues. We have a partnership with Family Action and food banks, particularly to try to build scale in that, and then also with the Trussell Trust, a partnership where we're educating the people in the food banks that they run to spot financial challenges that are endemic in the individual that they're serving through the food banks, that again, you can catch the underlying issue to correct the surface issue, which is not being able to provide food for their family. And they're very excited about the fact that they can not only teach their colleagues financial skills so that they can then impart that into the people that would use the food banks, but also digital skills. And I think there's a whole other underlying future-oriented challenge here, which is around the economies going digital. And a lot of the people that we're describing here don't have the basic digital confidence or digital access to be able to participate in that modern economy. And that's just going to make the problem and some of the divides that we're looking at even more challenging.
When we're talking about this idea of tailoring the product, tailoring the help to people, one thing that COVID certainly did was exacerbate those who need to provide childcare, those who take care of the elderly, which overwhelmingly falls on the hands of women. How does that make a difference in terms of offering these products?
I think, again, it goes into really, I think you bring up such a good point, because it's stepping into the lived realities of people's lives. So, one of the next no-interest loans was to a lady who was a single mother, wanted to go back to work, but needed to secure a nursery place for her child. To secure the nursery place, she had to pay a month's fees up front before she'd got into the job. She was able to have a no-interest loan that then enabled her to secure the nursery place, which means that she's then got into employment. And so I think it's another one that we funded through one of our providers, Fair for You, in partnership with Iceland, right? It received some press. It was a £50 food top-up card. And there was a bit of a well, is that buy now, pay later for food? No, what it enabled people to do is at £50, you qualify for free delivery for your groceries, and you can buy in bulk. So you now think you're a single parent with children. Now something that became a massive labour has become a possibility for you. So I think that's the really important thing, is that one of the things where things fail is that the financial system is largely designed around people with predictable lives and predictable incomes. And things that work brilliantly for people whose lives are like that are hazards for other people. A direct debit, if you're not getting an irregular income, isn't something that's easy where you can save money. It's something that can tip you into an unauthorised overdraft and give you real problems. There are so many of these different things in terms of design that if you step into someone's reality, you can actually design much better products for it. And we've for anyone who's involved in financial product design, we've just done a massive piece of research on customer segmentation to analyse it by customer behaviour, financial behaviours, but also to look at what that means in terms of their lives and how you can then design products that really work for them. And so if anyone wants to get involved with that, we would love to spend time with you.
Sacha, I love all these call to actions. They're excellent. Matt, I'll give you a moment to do some call to actions, but I first do want to ask you the same question in terms of sort of product for the person, especially, again, as there are certain groups of people who have been more impacted by financial inequality than others.
Yeah, without doubt. And again, I don't think it's about product per se, but it's about how you help people use the product in a different way. And some of the modifications that Sacha described around making the product more flexible so that they can see the fact that it has the feasibility of suiting their needs. And again, I think for big banks in particular, it's taking what look like standardized, simple products and breaking them down and creating the modularity that allows people to piece it together in a way that suits their circumstances, part one. And part two, I think, bringing that to life. So again, through segmentation so that we better understand not just whether or not someone's vulnerable or not, but also the way they want to use the product. And that we tailor, again, communications and the interactions that we have with them, whether that's through the digital app or the person that they're speaking to on the phone or even in a physical premise that is ours or someone else's. And getting that level of complexity into our system so that we can create the flexibility to support people better is I think the obligation that I feel, and I think anybody in a large organization needs to start to take a hold of.
What has been the take-up of these sorts of things? Because, Sacha, you were talking about this idea that, I mean, the word needs to get out there. People need to learn about it. So what has that journey looked like for Barclays?
Yeah, as I said, for us, I don't purposely or personally spend a lot of time looking at volume, because I think it's about system design, and the volume will come once the system design works well. But I think we've definitely, as Sacha's alluded to, have anecdotes where we know where we get it right in a local community with the right team, with the right design of a product and the support around it. It definitely takes off. So what we're focusing on is how do you replicate that across communities across the UK and getting the volume of communities being supported in the right way rather than the volume of customers per se.
Yeah, well, we only have a few minutes left. I do want to wrap it with some more tangible, this is what needs to be done. Sacha, I mean, you've given us so many, but I don't know if you have any more in your arsenal, especially, if you want to give Matt advice about what Barclays UK needs to do, these financial service providers. What do you still see missing?
I think it's it's interesting. If you look at the high-cost credit market in the UK that was very successful and also caused quite a lot of harms, what it was really good at was removing friction in the customer journey and making it easy for people to do stuff. And so I think looking at, what can we learn from that and build into customer journeys? And I know you're already doing some stuff on it, but at the moment, we're working with an organisation called Lightning Reach to integrate grants finder for people. So there are a lot of foundations that are you're a journalist, you're a journalist who's now on hard times. Here is a foundation that actually has a hardship fund for you. There are actually hundreds of them, but it's impossible to navigate. If you've not got a lot of money, that is really hard in your headspace to trawl through and see if there are any. It's an obvious one where you can actually use AI and to actually really sort of, say, well, actually, you could qualify for this, try this one. So that's number one. There is £16 billion worth of benefits that are left unclaimed. Oftentimes that's actually older people because they feel ashamed of actually needing state support, and yet it is support the state has decided should be available to them. So building benefits calculators into journeys. And then also really then looking at what else can we build in terms of flexibility. And I think, Matt, that was the key word, was flexibility. Is at the moment, a lot of the system penalises people for the fact that, for example, they are going to miss payments. We know that people in financially vulnerable circumstances are going to miss payments. So why on earth do we have a credit reference system that penalises them for the fact that they miss payments? That is going to be normal. And interestingly at the moment, if you're a financial service provider that designs a product that is flexible and lets people flex their payments, they still get a black mark on their credit record because the credit records and stuff are designed around predictable lives, predictable incomes. If you miss a payment, you're bad, you're penalised. So I think there is some really interesting stuff that we can challenge at that very systemic level and say, design stuff for the reality of people's lives. Because gig working, people with unpredictable lives, unpredictable incomes, it's going to get bigger. And it's a big opportunity for organisations to take up, I think.
Matt?
I think the three big things I would say is the problem's all around you. So you don't have to go somewhere to find it. It's in your organization, it's in your team, it's potentially even in your family and your community. So So the more you pay attention, the more you'll spot it, and the better you can get involved with specific individuals, again, in your community, in your team, in your organization. Two is, exactly as Sacha said, I used APR as an example, but it's about how do you take the complexity of financial services and make it more accessible by taking the jargon out of it. And I think we've all got a role to play in that, particularly I think in this room and the orientation that we'll all have around the challenge that's here. So how do you demystify it and make it feel like it's more accessible just by the way in which we talk about it and help people understand how it can be useful to them? And then three, ultimately, is get involved in some sort of, I think, opportunity to try to create scale solutions. Because I think the problem is complex. There is no silver bullet, but we've all got to work hard, I think, to find those opportunities where we can scale it across hundreds of thousands and millions of people to make as big an intervention as we can. And that's why we're involved in it, because I think we have the opportunity, working with an organization like Sacha's, to spot opportunities for things that work in a particular community and then replicate it across many different communities. And I think we've all got a role to filter out the best ideas and then make sure that they're getting access to the right capital support and capability.